Talking about digital transformation, there's really three things from my perspective that's driving this. Obviously, the technology is one. There are new technologies coming on board which are empowered by the cloud that are coming available for our use that weren't around even only a few years ago. In Microsoft ourselves, we're developing many new technologies that we don't really have applications for. We've not figured out how you're going to use them yet, but there's more and more coming out of our research and development all the time. But the other thing that's really driving that as well is the cost of that technology is dropping dramatically. Many technologies that we're hearing about now have been around for many years, 10, 15 years, but their cost to consume has dropped 1,000-fold. So, for example, I think of sensors for Internet of Things, or drones, or 3D printing, DNA analysis. All of those things have dropped dramatically in terms of affordability. So we have new technologies arriving all the time. They're becoming much more cost-effective to consume, and with the cloud, they're becoming much more ubiquitous and be able to be consumed from anywhere in the world at any time. Another thing that's driving that comes out of having all this new technology is we're seeing vast amounts of data now being produced. I remember having conversations with customers only 5 years ago talking about terabytes of data that was going to be circling around the globe. Already now, only 5 years later, we're now talking about exabytes and petabytes of data and even looking beyond that. That data promises to unlock unimaginable new revenue streams and opportunities, much better understanding of customers, much better understanding of our operations. For humans, in fact, it's too much information to consume. That amount of data, there's no way a single person could get their head wrapped around what all that data means. Fortunately, at the same time with this data being produced, we have new technologies, whether it be machine learning or artificial intelligence, that allows us to analyse that data in real time and produce value from it as soon as we receive it, and become much more proactive and identifying trends and connections between data that we never would have been able to do ourselves without the aid of the technology. And the third and the most important thing I think that's driving this transformation and makes it very different from what we've seen in the past is this really is a social transformation more than even a technology transformation. Technology has now become such an embedded part of our lives. We're using it multiple times a day, whether it be our hand phone, something that we wear, a watch. There's new devices coming out all the time that we're going to be integrating much more of our lives. We don't really make a distinction now between now I'm going to do email, or now I'm going to play on my computer, or now I'm going to do some sort of activity. All of that technology is now embedded into many aspects of what we're doing, and that's what's really driving, I think, this transformation. I like to say it's not just a cloud transformation, but it's also a crowd transformation, in the sense that cloud is really enabling us to connect so many more connections between people, between businesses, between that data, and enabling that to really transform the way the world is working today. And we're seeing that blending of the digital world and the real world, which is driving a lot of this transformation. So I think from a CEO perspective, at the World Economic Forum last year, this was the #1 topic, was, as Sanjay was talking about, the fourth industrial revolution, this digital revolution. In a recent CEO survey globally, 86% of CEOs said this is their #1 focus going forward. No other issue is going to impact their organisations in a bigger way, and they're preparing for it. The questions they're asking is, how do I develop these skills within my organisation? How do I harness this capability? And I think for those of you here today that are running and developing businesses, that should be on the top of your list as well. For those of you in the IT departments, if you're CIOs or IT managers, I think you need to be out ahead of that question as well when your CEO comes to you to ask you about how am I going to achieve these capabilities within our business? How are we going to use this new technology, this new environment to transform the way our businesses operate? From this slide here, I think it's useful to look at just what the impact of these changes are going to be. Traditionally, in the past, when we were very much on a product-oriented type society, we could have a product life cycle that might run 10, 15, 20 years. Then we moved more into the information age where products were changing a bit more quicker. Microsoft is a great example. Years ago, we might release a new version of Windows every 5 years or so. And then we move into the experience economy where, again, customers are demanding new experiences every year or every couple of years. And in the digital environment we're finding now, and again from a Microsoft perspective, we're constantly releasing new versions of our products all the time. We have that immediate feedback from customers. We can push that into our development chain and release that on an ongoing basis. And this is really the speed that's starting to develop for all businesses. All businesses, all sectors, all industries are being impacted by this digital disruption. I was talking to a CEO last week, and he basically said, as far as I'm aware, there's at least 100 companies that are out there. Their only focus is how to put me out of business. That's all they think about all day. That's all their people do. That's all the money they invest is doing. They're only thinking about putting me out of business. And that's a problem for me, not just because I need to be thinking about how I stay in business, but I've got a big company to run. I've got investments that have already been made in technologies. I've got long-standing contracts with suppliers and customers that I can't just abandon overnight to try and chase the new thing. I need to find a way to be both flexible as well as continue to keep the lights on and running my regular business. McKinsey's estimated that this latest wave of change is going to be at 10 times the speed that we saw through the dot-com boom, which just let that sink in for a minute, because we saw a lot of change over the last 10 to 15 years with these companies coming online. The wave that is coming of this new digital innovation, which we're seeing in many companies already, is going to be 10 times faster than that. But the thing that's even more challenging is the impact of those changes. They're predicting will be 300 times the impact of any major change that we've seen before. So again, we may not yet be seeing the big waves coming in Bangladesh, for example, yet, but they will be coming, and they will be coming very soon. And now you have a bit of time to be preparing for those changes. But again, I don't want to sound too scary, because it's not just about a threat that this brings to existing businesses, but about an opportunity that you can get on and catch this wave and transform your businesses. So as I mentioned, there's definitely a threat aspect for a lot of companies to be aware of. If we think about the Fortune 500, 50% of the companies that existed in the Fortune 500 15 years ago are no longer in the Fortune 500. Some of them don't even exist at all anymore. And the outlook certainly is that number will increase over time. And as we were talking about Uber or Airbnb, these companies that didn't exist 5 years ago, they now have market values higher than a lot of their incumbent competitors. Airbnb's market value is, I'm not sure, last time I checked it was 10 times that of the Hilton Group. And the Hilton Group owns a lot of assets. Airbnb owns almost none. So there's definitely a threat to businesses if you're not prepared to face this change. A lot of CEOs that I talk to now are saying, well, I really need to be disrupting myself, because otherwise somebody is going to disrupt me for me. So I want to be ahead of that curve. But at the same time, there is a great opportunity. This new technology, the cloud technology and other technologies, offer a great opportunity for organisations to really transform their operations, to uncover new markets, new customers. And I think, again, the World Economic Forum estimated that there's $100 trillion worth of benefit just in the next 10 years alone arising from the implementation of these technologies. I think a key thing around that, as I was mentioning about the power of the crowd, is that in this new digital environment, it really places the customer back at the centre of what organisations need to be thinking about. This isn't primarily a technology change, it's a customer change driven by technology. The companies that are succeeding are the ones that aren't so hung up on technology, but the ones that are laser focused on their customers and how they can add value to their customers, how they can embed themselves in their customer's life as they live through a digital life cycle through their day. How can I interact with my customer more regularly through these digital touch points? How do I make my customer's life more frictionless, easier for them to get things done? The companies that focus on that and then use technology, and as we were saying earlier, invisible technology, it should be invisible to the customer, to get more value out of their day, is really where these customers are succeeding. And I think we've seen these transformations as well in many companies already, and it's not just about surviving the digital transformation or finding new revenue or new opportunities for doing business, but it's also about doing better business. What we've seen from the organisations that we've studied is there's different approaches to digital transformation. We have what we call the fashionistas, who may be spending a lot on technology, are really engaging their customers very strongly. They have great websites, great apps that are engaging their customers, but they're failing to deliver on that promise because they haven't looked at the back end of their organisations and using technology to make sure that they're delivering more efficiently and more effectively. On the other hand, we've seen more conservative businesses that do a lot of work in terms of rationalising their operations, becoming very efficient, but they've neglected that front end and engaging their customers. They can respond to customers very efficiently, but they're losing the war to be attracting those customers into their organisation. So the group that we call the digital masters, who really from start to finish have built this digital mindset into their organisations, are the ones that are achieving tremendous success. And it's across all of the measures: more revenue, more profitability, and also higher market value. So this is a great opportunity to transform your business, to engage more closely with your customers, to enthuse and motivate your staff about the ways that they can satisfy the customers. So what does a digital organisation look like? And I think there's a few key technologies that are happening at the moment that are worth talking about in this context. Obviously, cloud is the underpinning of a lot of these technologies. It's the capability to deliver these technologies and capabilities almost anywhere in the world now. We have people in remote villages with otherwise no internet access that are now able to use these technologies through cloud. There's one great example in Africa where villages, if they needed to check their email, it would take them 5 hours to walk to the closest digital hotspot. But an organisation there used technology to actually use the white space of TV signals to deliver low-cost, high-speed Wi-Fi to those organisations at a very low cost. And they could roll that out very quickly. And in fact, they disrupted the telecommunications provider in that company by being able to roll out that internet access across the region, which had impacts on people's education outcomes, their abilities to do business, very much quicker than waiting for the traditional infrastructure to be put into place. So cloud is becoming pervasive, it's becoming accessible everywhere, and it's really delivering all these other technologies in a very consumable, low-cost way, which organisations can deploy very quickly. So what are those other technologies that we're looking at? These are really driving what we might call the start of an intelligent organisation. The organisation itself is becoming intelligent and being able to react to the market. So what are the things that are driving that? First, the ability to listen to what's going on in the market. So we have what we call social listening, being able to look at what people are saying out in, whether it be Facebook, other social channels, being able to measure people's sentiment, being able to register that, bring that in real time, and be able to start responding to that in real time. The other thing we're listening to are devices, the Internet of Things. We can listen to all the equipment that we have located all over the world in real time. One of our customers that are using this type of approach, Ecolabs, they manage thousands of massive water reservoirs all over the world. In the past, when they needed to find out what was going on in a particular reservoir, they'd have to call up somebody at that reservoir, they would need to walk outside, take water samples, walk along all of the monitoring equipment, capture all that information, go back to the office and send that back to the head office. There was no easy way for them to get a view of what was happening across all of their reservoirs around the world. They've now put Internet of Things devices, monitoring devices and sensors through all of their reservoirs, and now they can understand the water quality, the water depth, any other mechanical issues that are happening in any reservoir anywhere around the world from a hand phone in real time. That's transformed the way they do business, and it's transformed the value that they can provide to the people that they're serving through those reservoirs. As I mentioned before, when we have all this data coming in, the next challenge is what do we do with all this data? And that's where we get into big data analysis and machine learning. We don't even know the full extent of what's going to be able to be possible with analysing this data. One example recently, Microsoft Research with some professors from Columbia University used historical Bing searches to be able to identify people that probably had pancreatic cancer before they could medically be identified as having that process. And that was simply by, once we'd identified who those people were and going back through their history of Bing searches, there was a pattern that developed of what people with this condition, before they fully realised what the condition were, the types of internet searches they were doing. So that's just an example of, once we have this data, the patterns that we can find. Some of them will be great for us as citizens, some of them will be great for us as customers and organisations. The ability to bring that data in and analyse it in real time and look for those patterns and then act on those patterns are really some more of the technologies that are driving the intelligent organisation. And then finally, again, as Sanjay alluded to, a lot of technologies now that humanise the way we interact with those technologies. So, for example, chatbots. We have soon to have a project running with Singtel in Singapore, where they're using chatbots to interact with customers that have inquiries. So rather than having to wait to speak to a person, they can talk to a chatbot who will interact with them in a human-like conversation. And they're finding this is particularly effective with older people that don't really want to be searching through websites to try and find information. And they can interact in a human-like conversation to get to the information they need within the organisation. All of these sorts of things are helping us interact with the technology in a much more human way, in a much more way that makes sense to us as human beings, rather than us having to learn how to talk computer. Okay, so the way that we think about how you start to put some of this into perspective, from a Microsoft perspective, we talk about 4 key pillars when we're looking at digital transformation. Engaging your customers. Everyone's in a war now for getting customers' attention and keeping the attention. There are so many offers that are available in the market. How do you reach your customers? How do you keep their attention? And most importantly in this day and age, how do you gain the trust of that customer? How do you show that you're investing time to understand them and coming back to them with offers that are relevant to them and are meaningful to them? The next area we look at is empowering employees. How do you empower your employees with tools to be that much more responsive to customers? How do you ensure that there's collaboration across your organisation? A lot of organisations that we deal with are still struggling with the silos of traditional operation that they work within. But to be agile and to compete in the new digital economy against companies like Uber, Airbnb and these other organisations, you can't be still operating in your silos. You need to break down those silo walls and be able to collaborate with anyone in the organisation you need to get that change done for the customer. So providing the tools to enable that are very important to digital transformation as well. We've talked a lot about how do you optimise operations, how do you use this technology to become more efficient, to remove roadblocks, to remove friction, as we call it, when you're interacting with customers. A lot of these technologies are really making profound changes to the way we can become more efficient, both in managing our data and managing the process of interacting with customers. And finally, we talk about transforming products and services. How do these new technologies allow us to offer things that we'd never thought of in the past? The examples that we've talked about with Uber and so forth are examples of organisations creating entirely new businesses from scratch. For those organisations that are already existing, what you need to be looking at is how do you use your current scope of operations, your current weight in the market, and adapt that to a digital transformation to get ahead of those people that are likely to be coming to disrupt your market. How is this relevant to Bangladesh? I've had a few conversations where people say, well, you know, digital transformation seems a long way off from where we are today. We're just starting to try and get some of the basics of our technology into place. Don't we have to walk before we can run? And to a certain extent, that's true, but I'd also say definitely not, because again, we think about these companies that have only existed for 5 years. They started from nothing, and they've projected by using cloud into these massively large companies. So there is an ecosystem that you need to develop. There are skills that you need to develop within your organisations, but they're no more difficult to develop than for anyone else that's operating anywhere else in the world. And I think as an example of that, I was talking about eco-labs a bit earlier, where they were using Internet of Things to control the water quality of their reservoirs around the world. Another example, we're working with Oxford University to put similar monitoring equipment in 10,000 hand pumps in remote villages across both Africa and Asia. And these are villages that have never had internet access or any other form of technology. But now we've used this technology to put those monitoring systems in those hand pump wells, which have had profound impacts on the health of those villages, because now they can know in real time the quality of the water that's coming out of the hand pump. But it's also provided other advantages to them in the sense of we're able to monitor whether that pump is likely to break down within the next 24 hours, and they're able to be serviced ahead of that pump breaking down, which is a massive change for those villages that when their pump broke down, they might have to wait a month before that could be repaired, and they'd somehow have to find water from other sources. So I think that is a good example of covering both the range of what you can do with cloud. You can be a very large global organisation, or you can be a very small or not even an existing organisation at the moment, and use this cloud technology to transform your customers, transform your business, and transform your communities. And finally, to wrap up, a lot of questions have come about how do we go about developing these capabilities? How do we go about digitally transforming? Lots of organisations have tried different ways. I was talking again today with an organisation that had set up a unit within itself to disrupt itself. A lot of organisations have set these types of organisations up, but each organisation has its own flavour that it needs to think about. The approach that we've seen work fairly successfully with our customers is you need to start thinking about what that digital journey that you want to go on. What are the opportunities for using digital transformation? And again, I think the key aspect to that conversation is less about the technology and less about your customers. What is going to be of value to customers? Really understanding your customers, getting to intimately understand what their needs are and how you can fill more of those needs. And then developing a digital transformation unit. Again, these types of units are not particularly IT-driven units. They would be people from across the business that have the customer experience, the process experience, the logistics experience, as well as the information technology experience to develop that change. And then finally, having a digital innovation lab. Having some cloud areas in the organisation that you can experiment with, try things, experiment with them on customers, see what's working, what's not working, and re-innovate. I was at a very interesting talk from the UK government not long ago, who were recognised amongst governments as being one of the most visionary governments in terms of bringing digital transformation to government services. And they were asked to talk about what things worked really well in their digital transformation and what things didn't work well. And when they talked about the things that worked really well, they had a very long list of things that this worked well, this was fantastic, we got great response to this. But when the person came to talk about what didn't work well, he had nothing on his list. And the reason why his list was empty wasn't because nothing failed, it was simply because under this cloud capability, he said as soon as something wasn't working, we stopped it. The investment was so small we could turn it off, release that back into the cloud, not pay for it, it was gone. We then had that capability to come up and start something else as soon as we found something else we wanted to work on. I think that's a key message for how you engage with the cloud. It's very rapid, it's very quick, it's low investment. You can start experimenting straight away. You might want to start experimenting by moving some of your websites or small apps into the cloud, start building some skills around that. You may want to start considering whether you move your data centre into the cloud. All these ways you can start to develop those skills within your organisation, and then over time, remember, keeping the focus on the customer and starting to innovate, experiment, learn, fail fast, and then come back with something better. So thank you for your time today. I'll hand over to the next speaker.